Hello, my name is Catherina and I'm a 3D artist specialized in lighting, texturing, and shading. In this video, I'll show you how I textured realistic metal for one of my personal projects done for my demo reel using Mari. In the bonus section at the end, I will also show you how I created a smart material inspired by the material done on the clock. Okay, so just to give you some background information on this project, as I mentioned before, I did this for my demo reel, and I really wanted to do a CG integration with a real live action plate to showcase some realism, some lighting, some texturing, some shading, all in one project. And so I was browsing through Pinterest for some inspiration, and I came across these old alarm clocks that were hollowed out and then crafted into miniature rooms. And I really liked this one. It felt very cozy. I really liked the chipped and painted metal, and I thought it would be a really interesting texture to paint, and it just had a nice material variety overall. You see this cute frog here. I decided to replace it with a girl and a cat, making them somewhat look like my cat and I. My idea here was that the old clock with the interior scene would be representing the past, holding one of my favorite memories, which is cuddling my cat in my room. And it's standing on my really messy desk, which I promise I just made it look like that for the plate. And it's standing there suggesting that I am the one who crafted it, paying tribute to my late cuddly childhood friend. The setup I use is pretty simple. I have a main flow with my material connected to a multi-channel merge, a mask for the material, which is a teleport receiver connected to our isolation masks up here, which are basically just a black base with a transparent paint node where I can paint or fill the parts of my object with white. Merged over, all is connected to a teleport broadcast, which goes to our receiver. On top of that, I have a backdrop which I use to stock my mesh maps or any imports like tileables which I use. And I just put them all in here and connect them to teleport broadcast nodes and reference them inside my materials just because I think it's a cleaner and less destructive way to work. If I control left click on my material, it opens it up. Here you can see all of its properties, but we won't use all of these. For this project specifically, I only use the diffuse, the metalness, the specular, and the bump channel. So the first thing I did was bake my mesh maps. I used the ambient occlusion and the curvature and baked them out as paint nodes. I dropped them into my backdrop, organized them, and connected them to teleport broadcasters so that I can later pick them up in the materials. Another node that I really like to use is the surface normal node. I think it comes in really handy when you want to create masks based on the way that your geometry is facing. So as you can see, the clock metal consists of mainly 3 layers: a rusty base, a beige base coat, and green paint. Once I had my material nodes set up, I went inside and created a solid base for each of them. I did this strictly procedurally though, no hand painting yet, just mixing and blending noises like the purlin, the cloud, and of course the mesh maps. Most importantly, I used a few tiled alphas which matched the material attributes on my reference. And while I did focus on matching the material on the reference, at first it was just important to get the overall feel right, like general overall color and basic texture attributes. Once I was done with the material bases, I moved on to painting the mask for them. Honestly, this was one of the most fun parts of the texturing process. I really enjoyed trying to match the shape of all the areas covered by paint. It felt very similar to drawing. I started out by blocking out the rough shapes and getting into the details as I progressed. Honestly, there are other methods that you could choose which are probably much faster. First of all, you could just flip your reference the other way around as well as your asset, and that'll make copying the shapes much easier because you'll trick your brain into actually seeing the shapes instead of just what is there. But I think the fastest way to do this is to just project your reference onto the model. Make sure to align it really well as you can, and just get an empty paint node and project it onto your model. Again, you have to be really clean when doing this, otherwise it'll be crooked. And then just get a second paint node and trace the shapes and use that second paint node as a mask. If you are under time pressure, I would definitely recommend the last method, or at least using that as a start off for your basics, but I went along with fully hand painting it just for the fun of it. As for the brush, I used the Mari default brush since I think it has a good aim and it isn't too sharp or soft. And I used a Grunge Alpha as a paint through so that the shapes were already broken up a bit and it didn't look too clean and a bit more damaged. Once I was done with painting the masks for both paint layers, this is what they looked like applied on top of each other. Taking another closer look at the reference, you can see that it has a lot of color variation going on, for example some turquoise spots in the green paint on the frame and bells, some red on the handle, and some washed out parts in the rusty material. So I selected the Sponge 1 brush, which I really like to use when hand painting color variations, and I went back into the diffuse to match the details to the reference. Here you can see that the hand-painted color variations really did make a big difference and made the layers really come together more. But as I was wrapping up the main part of the diffuse, there was just one subtle detail that I thought was missing. In my reference, the top areas of the clock had this very light dust buildup, so I wanted to recreate that effect. I did this by layering a dust material over everything else and then masking it using a surface normal node, so it only affects the upward facing parts of the geometry. I kept the effect really subtle by creating it down a little bit because I didn't want the dust to feel too strong or distracting. Then, to break it up, I added some slight variation using a noise texture. Alright, so now that I have all of my texture maps, this is the final rendered result, and on the right you can see what the 4 final maps look like. So before I end the video, I have a little bonus for you. I created this customizable smart material you see right here, inspired by the clock's material, and I wanted to show how I made it. The first thing I did was create a material node. The material I chose was the Arnold Standard Surface. So once you open up the material, it'll only have all of these material attributes that the Arnold shader has, but just like before, we only need 4 channels: the diffuse, the metalness, the specular roughness, and the bump. Before I took care of any of this though, I made sure to get my basics first. Bake mesh maps out, but this time as Geo Channels so that the smart material can read it for every object that I apply it on. Add the surface normal node, and get all of my type levels in here too. Really important because later on when using this material, it can only reference things that are actually inside of it. So for the next step, all I did was create a group node. It works like a folder, so when you go inside, it's empty. It just has an output node. And so what I did was copy all of the procedural base that I had for the rust in there. Now I have this group node working as a diffuse for my rusty layer. I did the same for all the other channels and for the layers like the beige base coat, the green paint, and the dust layer. Obviously, I want the layers to be only partially on the model, chipped and worn like the clock. So I went and created procedural masks for this, starting with the beige coat layer. All mask inputs of its channels are connected to teleport receivers, which are connected to our teleport broadcast, which transmits all the information from our group node up here. Moving on to the mask for the green layer, I only need the green paint to be in the same spots where the beige coat is, but smaller since it's a little more worn off. So the way I managed that was going back into the mask for the beige layer, and I took this part without the specific beige breakup and connected it to a teleport broadcast. Inside the group node for my green mask, I referenced it, but I made it a little crunchier with a brightness lookup node so that the white area becomes smaller. And then, just for some edge damage, I added a curvature and some kind of random chipping with another cloud node. Now the mask setup for the dust layer is much simpler. It's basically the same workflow I used earlier for the clock itself. I just referenced the surface normal, isolated the upward facing geometry by taking the R channel through an RGBA split node, and then graded it down with the brightness lookup so the effect wouldn't be too intense. After that, I merged in a bit of subtle breakup to keep the dust from looking too clean. And that's pretty much it for the dust mask. So now this is what all of the channels look like. And with all of that set up, you can see that I highlighted these backdrops in green, which means that these are the parts of the material that are adjustable. Basically, it means that in the node properties of the group nodes I use as masks, there are these sliders that can be adjusted. The reason this works goes back to what I mentioned earlier about renaming my nodes. I renamed them so I could easily keep track of what each node controls. Then, once I enable the handles in the node properties, making sure they're turned on orange, they automatically appear here in the group node properties under the name I assigned to their node. That way I can use only the controls I actually want to tweak later on when I apply the material on something else, and I can also keep the material much more organized and user-friendly. To export the material, I just go to the material node, set my export path in here, and click on export. If I want to import this material into another project, I can just right-click, File, Import Nodes, and then just select the destination where I exported it and click on Import. So this is the final smart material. I think it's a good starting base for the clock's chip metal, and honestly, I think it was kind of fun to create it. I hope you liked my video, and make sure to watch some of the other really cool tutorials from other artists here on this channel. Thank you for watching, bye bye!